And joining us on the phone right now is William Isaac, who is the author of a book called Senseless Panic, How Washington Failed America. Mr. Isaac, good morning to you.
Good morning. I'm happy to be with you.
Thank you so much for being here. You are the former chairman of the FDIC. Were you in that position during the savings and loan crisis?
I was in the position for about 8 years. I was appointed by Jimmy Carter in 1978 to the FDIC board, and I was named chairman by President Reagan in 1981, and I served until just about 1986. I was at the front end of the S&L crisis.
Are there any reasonable parallels between what happened then and the 2008 crisis? Did we learn lessons from that event back then that helped us at all get through this?
Not that I can tell.
What did we miss? What didn't we see?
Well, it's really interesting. That period back then was extremely rough, and I would tell you that the economic situation and the situation in the financial services industry, the banks, the S&Ls, and so forth, was far more serious than anything we faced this time around. We had very strong inflation in the 70s, and the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates to break the back of inflation, and the prime rate went to 21.5%. That's just stunning when you think about it. And it created all sorts of problems throughout the financial system, and borrowers who, you take out a loan at 6 or 7%, you're not expecting it to go to the interest rate to go to 22%.
No, you certainly are not. No.
And so anyway, it created a recession, a depression in the agricultural sector. It created serious problems for banks and S&Ls all around the country, and the energy industry collapsed, and we had a real estate recession that went about the country, causing vast damage, and our major banks were loaded up with third world debt and were on the verge of collapse. We actually had a standby plan to nationalize them, which we fortunately never had to implement. But all in all, we handled 3,000 bank and S&L failures in the 1980s, including some of the very largest in the country, 9 out of the 10 largest banks in Texas, for example. And we didn't create a panic. The economy we were able to get the economy turned around, and we got through it. This time, we've had 300 failures, and a very serious panic that rivaled the great crash of 1929. It wasn't as serious as that, but we had a very serious panic on our hands.
When you historically talk about what happened back then, it seems even more scary now than one would think. So why did the 2008 situation feel so much worse for us?
Well, I mean, first of all, the economy was fine in 2007. It was looking good, so they weren't dealing with serious economic problems. The financial industry was over leveraged, but was in seemingly pretty good shape. What happened was I believe they mishandled the crisis badly. They weren't prepared for it. They had no plan of attack, no coordinated strategy, and their actions. I think that I call them schizophrenic. The Wall Street firm Bear Stearns is on the verge of failure, so the government assists J.P. Morgan Chase to take it over and calm things down. And then shortly thereafter, Lehman Brothers, another Wall Street firm, gets in trouble, and they let it slide into bankruptcy. They told us for months that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae were in good shape, no problem. And then right after Lehman slid off into bankruptcy, they let Freddie and Fannie go down and put them into a government conservatorship and wiped out the preferred and common stock. Then AIG starts to come unglued, and they rescue it.
So you're talking about the Bush administration and
back and forth.
Treasury
right.
Secretary. Was there any one particular? Was it the Treasury Secretary you would place a lot of this blame on? Did he just not pay attention at all?
Well, I think he paid attention.
But before this happened.
well, yeah, I think all of us were probably asleep before it all came to pass. But once it became apparent we had problems, I believe a serious issue was that the Treasury managed the crisis.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that's the appropriate way to manage a crisis. You don't have a political agency that is not in the crisis management business, is not staffed for it, being in charge of handling a crisis. And we got through the 1980s because we had strong independent agencies that took control and organize the response to the crisis.
What are your thoughts now about what's happened since that time? The Obama administration came in. A great deal of the TARP money has been paid back now. The auto industry is on much better footing. Haven't the end results been okay when you look at everything that was going on at that time?
Well, I think we've come back from the edge, but at enormous cost. And by the way, since you mentioned TARP, let me just address that. I was strongly opposed to the TARP legislation. I went up to Washington and worked hard with hundreds of members of Congress, and we actually defeated it on the first vote in the House. I believe the TARP was absolutely unnecessary, and that the language they used in trying to sell the TARP was highly inflammatory and exacerbated the crisis. They used terms like financial Armageddon,
right.
And if you don't pass this bill immediately, there might not be a financial system next week. That is hardly soothing
right.
to the public. And so I think they made the economic crisis all the more serious.
Yep.
And Secretary Paulson, the former Secretary of the Treasury, in his recent book, admits in there that shortly after Congress, within days after Congress enacted the TARP, he realized that his plan was not going to work.
Right.
And
William Isaac, I have to interrupt you here because our time is up, but the book is called Senseless Panic, How Washington Failed America. And we appreciate your joining us on the show this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
It was really my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here.